Your PSA and RMM tools are amongst the most important tools in your toolbox for your MSP. And when done well, they can be massively beneficial to you and your clients. But when not done well, you might have some issues. So let's talk about that today. My name is Adam Hanneman. Welcome to Ramblings of a Geek. I've been in the MSP space for the better part of the last couple of decades, and I've seen PSAs and RMMs implemented well and not so much. So let's really think about the top few ways to set both tools up for success. We'll start with your RMM. Your RMM stands for Remote Maintenance and Monitoring, and it's really the tool that almost every MSP can use, so that's why we're starting with it. And the short version of all this is you can do all kinds of cool things with your RMM. You can check for servers being up, you can run some automations, you can do lots of different counting of things. All of these different pieces that you can do with your RMM can be hugely beneficial to you and your clients. So let's talk about the top few things that I think you should think about. The first piece is I wouldn't be shy about asking for some help to get your RMM set up. Now, most MSPs can set up an RMM just fine on their own, but there's nothing wrong with getting a fast track to getting it set up properly right away. So don't be afraid to ask for some help. The second piece of this is make sure you get your permissions dialed in correctly. Your junior engineers don't typically need the same level of permission as your senior engineers do. So don't just give everybody access to all of the things. It could be an easy opportunity for a junior engineers to do some damage because your RMM, depending on how you configure it, could potentially do some damage if used improperly. The next piece is you want someone to manage the tool appropriately. Somebody has to keep an eye on all the things. Somebody has to keep it from becoming a mess. It's really easy when, especially as you are building scripts out and automations in there, to have scripts and automations here, there, and everywhere, and 3 or 4 scripts to do the same thing. And maybe one of the scripts doesn't work at all, but you think it does. Like there's all kinds of things that can happen. So make sure that you are doing everything you can to get things as fully dialed in as possible, as early as possible, and keeping your house clean there. The next piece is you want to automate as much as practical, but not everything needs to be automated. A lot of automation engineers have the idea that if you have to do something a second time, you should automate it. Now, maybe, but if you're only going to do a thing twice and it doesn't take all that long to do it, I'm not sure it should be automated. So you want to make sure that you're automating things appropriately, the things that are going to truly move the needle for either your project team or your service team. If it doesn't help the team out effectively, I'm not sure I would automate it, right? So if a thing is going to take you 25 minutes to automate and 27 minutes to do, I'm not sure that you want to do it that way. And especially if it's flip-flopped, if it's going to take you longer to automate than to just do the work, and if you're not going to do that work over and over and over again, I'm not sure it's worth spending the time on automating those things. Now, related to this, your automation engineers need to have some amount of oversight and paying attention to what they've got going on, because it's really easy for them to really kind of rabbit hole down a thing because, one, they're smart. Two, they see an issue and they want to just go fix this issue and they know they can script it out. Well, if you're going to spend hours and hours and hours scripting on a thing that you're going to do twice a year, I'm not sure it makes a ton of sense to do that over, say, something that you do every single day and you're going to save a few minutes every single day, right? Somebody needs to take a look at the bigger picture and help make the appropriate automation prioritization happen. Now, you might want to spend hours and hours and hours automating a thing that you only do twice a year, because if it takes longer to do the work, then I can maybe get behind it, but somebody needs to do that evaluation. And I think it needs to be more than just the automation engineer, because they're going to want to, go diving into the biggest, ugliest issues that are out there. And sometimes that's not the best use of their time. Sticking to the scripting and automation world, you want to script and automate in languages that are as commonly used as possible. Said differently, if your RMM tool has its own scripting engine, I'm not sure I would spend a ton of time scripting in that if you don't have to. Because if you're able to use a generic scripting language like PowerShell or something like that, it will allow you to pick up your scripts and move them to a different tool. And many MSPs change tools over time. So if you have spent hours or hundreds or dozens of hours automating in a very specific tools scripting language, you might have a harder time moving those scripts to your new RMM. So wherever possible, script in a common scripting language. The last thing I want to talk about as it relates to your RMM is, wherever possible, tie your PSA and RMM together. There's a few different ways where this comes into effect. And the first one is sometimes your PSA can call scripts just by codifying a ticket properly, right? You can potentially do things like resetting the spooler service or other things like that, where it's just very simple stuff that can be done with just codifying a ticket properly. You will often find that when done well, your dispatchers and level ones can solve issues just by like logging a ticket properly. And the second piece is, especially if you're going to be doing billing by the user, by workstation, or those kinds of things, that your PSA and RMM talk to each other as much as possible, so that way you're getting the right information out of your PSA, because a lot of that data should live in your PSA as far as like number of workstations, number of users, and those kinds of things. Your RMM engine can be a massive boost to productivity and efficiency. So keep that house clean, keep your technicians focused, and your clients and your technicians will reap the benefits of having a solid RMM tool put together. If you're getting some value from this video, please do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help me here on YouTube. Let's shift over and talk about your PSA tool for a minute. PSA stands for Professional Services Automation, and most MSPs use your PSA tool to do things like ticketing and documentation and invoicing and those kinds of things. Now, I like to look at that almost in reverse order. I like to think of your PSA as a invoicing tool that gets accurate invoices by having good documentation and by managing your tickets well. So let's talk about the PSA tool for a few minutes here, because I think it's really important. My first recommendation as it relates to your PSA is to get some help deploying the thing. It's a complicated piece of software and it's not terribly easy to set up. Now that said, if you are watching this video, you are smart enough to set up your PSA. That's not the issue. The issue is you can burn hour after hour after hour after hour trying to set the thing up, because there's a million different options all over the place. So simply pay someone to help you get set up. Paying for a shortcut or a fast track to being able to use a tool to its fullest extent is not a bad thing, especially if you are a smaller MSP, because the last thing you need to do as an owner operator or owner with a couple technicians is to just burn hour after hour setting this thing up. Our MSP businesses are based on our clients paying us for our technical expertise. Well, none of us are really experts in our PSA tools, so don't try to figure it out yourself. Pay for an expert to help you. Now, if you are a very small MSP and you can't afford to pay someone to help you right away, I might wait to set up a PSA until I can afford to pay a consultant or someone to help me get it set up, because again, your time is more valuable doing things like closing sales and working tickets and those kinds of things than it is to set up a tool that's going to take you 20 or 30 hours to set up. When you are a small MSP, you can simply work out of an Outlook inbox or a spreadsheet and then bill out of your accounting package. You're doing just fine if you're doing that, especially early on. Save that money, pay for someone to help you implement, and you're going to be much better off in the long run. Like I said before, your PSA is really an invoicing engine. So you want to make sure you're getting your invoicing and the financial side of the world set up as early as you possibly can. This is where hiring an outside third party to help you with it makes a lot of sense, because they can help get your invoices set up. They can help tie your line items in your contracts and in the PSA itself to your chart of accounts and those kinds of things. And they can help by making sure that you're writing the information back and forth to your accounting package appropriately. Those things are really, really important and really easy to do wrong. So get that done right early on and have some accurate invoices that come out of it, because I think the gold standard is to invoice out of your PSA. Now, as it relates to invoicing out of your PSA, the best way to get there is by logging tickets appropriately, tracking time appropriately in your tickets, and doing all those pieces. Even if you're an owner operator or owner plus a tech or two, doing that well now sets you up for so much success later on and helps automate as much of the invoicing as possible, and that's what your goal is. The other component to make sure you get your invoice correct is to use your PSA for documentation, especially if you are billing by endpoint or by user. Making sure that information is accurate in your PSA is going to help get your invoices correct. Now, this is where that link to your RMM may come in, especially if you're billing by endpoint, because your RMM can write back to your PSA and tell your PSA how many endpoints you have for each additional client and those kinds of things. Otherwise, that's a kind of a manual process, which could take some time to reconcile on a regular basis. Now, on the flip side of this documentation side of the world is that most PSAs aren't great documentation engines on their own as it relates to things like your process documentation. So if you have to put your process documentation in a third-party tool, make sure your engineers know exactly where to look and when to go to each different tool, because you want to have as few places to look as possible. And I'll actually link above to my standards and process documentation video as well, because I think that's an important sort of a side note here as well. So Get your documentation dialed in. Make sure that you are automating the import of that as much as you possibly can, especially if you can pull it from your RMM. I think you're doing a pretty good job there. If you'd like to see more about what's going on in my world and some of the other pieces that I do that are outside of YouTube, do me a favor, head over to my website. I'll put the link in the description below and sign up for my newsletter. I'll send out an email once a month and keep you apprised as to what's going on in my world. Your PSA and RMM tools are amongst the most valuable tools in your MSP toolbox. So make sure you have them configured correctly and that you are using them to their fullest extent. Your clients and engineers will feel it when it's done well, and they'll also feel it when it's not done well. So lean into it, make sure that those are properly managed, and you're going to be on your way to success in your MSP. Thanks for coming on this ramble with me, and I hope to see you on the next one.